Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the second half of our Adapting Day convening. Um, I'm excited to introduce the next panel, the panel titled TECHquity. We'll hear from innovators in the field about embedding responsible, ethical, and accessible technology in training and prepping young adults for the future of work and how technology may enhance or hinder workforce equity. Jessica Santana is a great partner of JobsFirst NYC. She is the co-founder and CEO of America on Tech, an organization on a mission to prepare the next generation of tech leaders. America on Tech provides students with access to the development, mentoring, network, and professional experiences that prepare them for degrees and careers in technology. She has been named an inaugural leader to the Robin Hood Foundation's Power Fund, Forbes 30 Under 30 list, and NYN's 40 Under 40 Rising Stars list. Jessica, I am thrilled you are moderating this panel, and I'll pass the mic over to you.
Thank you so much, Roman. It is really awesome to be in community with each and every one of you today. And I want to thank JobsFirst for putting on such an amazing and important event. I'm going to start off with some introductions to my fellow panelists. And the first person I'm going to introduce today is Ryan. Ryan is the managing director at Achieve and University Ventures. Ryan's commentary on where the puck is going in higher education regularly appears in the Gap Letter, Forbes, TechCrunch, Inside Higher Education, Fortune, HR Dive, and VentureBeat, among others. He is the author of A New You, Faster and Cheaper Alternatives to College, which was named to the Wall Street Journal as one of the books of the year for 2018. And he's also the author of College Disrupted, The Great Unbundling of Higher Education. Next, I'm going to introduce Sean. Sean is the founder and CEO of Skyhive Technologies. He is a recognized thought leader and innovator in labor economics and the future of work, having invented quantum labor analysis that marries economic theory with artificial intelligence to produce the most advanced real-time knowledge graph of job, skills, training, and labor market intelligence in the world. In 2020, Sean was invited by the Government of Canada to join the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence and represents Canada as one of the 15 founding countries. And last but not least, I'm going to introduce Bharani. Bharani is the founder and CEO of Transfer, who's on a mission to create alternative pathways to career success through intuitive learning methods so more people can succeed and be upwardly mobile. He was also one of the co-founders of math tutoring software company called LearnBop, which was acquired in 2014 by online learning company K-12 Inc. Thanks to each of you for being with us today. I'm going to just jump right in to my first question. And my first question is, what is your vision for the use of technology in the nonprofit sector and workforce development fields? And how does your model fit into that vision? And maybe we can start off with Bharani.
Hey, thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to speak. It's great to be here. Often when I get introduced to speak on panels, I don't get to speak to such a passionate group of people. A lot of times it's very business focused, so I'm pumped for today's conversation. We specifically work with the most high need and underinvested groups in the country. Typically, everyone's familiar with gifted and talented programs and private schools and stuff like that, and how that works. And we simply could not achieve our mission of job training and career exploration at scale without working with nonprofits such as the Boys and Girls Club or Goodwill, and working with fantastic workforce development partners such as the Alabama Industrial Department of Training and other workforce groups around the country. And that's because these groups are set up specifically to serve those that are the most in need. Generally, what we've seen in the public education system is a lot of resources are invested in the highest performers. And it's what we've seen is this kind of negative circle where you have folks who are underinvested in because they may have come from disadvantaged backgrounds. For example, over 1.3 million students in the public education system are homeless. So those students are coming to the classroom, without the proper resources and the proper energy levels, and then they don't perform in a traditional classroom, and it becomes a downward spiral from there. So what we do in a nutshell is we have created the concept of a pre-apprenticeship program in virtual reality. And the way it works is someone can put on the headset, and it's as if they're learning from a coach or a mentor. They learn how to do the job in virtual reality. They take off the headset and they perform the job in front of an employer or a hiring manager. And that person can make a decision and say, okay, like I've seen this person do the job, so I'm willing to give them an offer of employment. To produce this, the impact that we want to have, we have to work with these organizations because they're well established across all 50 states and they're already serving these target populations. So we can literally just ship somebody a headset and they can be in a virtual training facility, kind of like the one you see me in today, and start learning the skills, and more importantly, start demonstrating that they know the skills to an employer so that they can get that job that pays well. And the programs are funded by existing budgets that workforce development and nonprofits have, which is what helps these our target population get access. And that's how we are helping bring equity at scale to the most needy population.
Thank you for sharing. And maybe Sean, can you jump in here on this question as well?
Sure. Thanks, Jessica, and good morning, everyone. So to the first part of the question as to what is the use of technology and how does it specifically relate to the not-for-profit sector? A consideration that we often overlook is that accessibility to technology is at the most simplest it's ever been in the world's history. And the cost to access that technology is dropping very, very quickly. And so, there's the common term that all organizations will be technology organizations, and I strongly believe that. And I strongly believe that goes part and parcel with the not-for-profit sector, education, or companies and communities across the world. Where we're moving is into what Kevin Kelly, who is a prolific thought leader and the original editor of Wired magazine, calls the era of cognification. And so cognification can be defined as the fusing of human and machine intelligence to help with decision making and making things more efficient. And so just like we have a smart TV at home or a smart fridge or Google, Siri, or Alexa, we're going to be seeing technologies cognifying and using the vast amounts of data that are now becoming available in order to support human decision making. And so that being said, there is no one technology that will ever solve problems. It requires human beings to use that technology and the results of that technology to actually interact with people. And so what we talk about at SkyHive, we're very focused on reskilling the world at scale and using technology to help people more rapidly reskill and retrain and prepare for jobs that are emerging and jobs in the future. And that's only achieved through a combination of art and science. And so the science is the technology, but the artists are the practitioners, the teachers, the mentors, the coaches, the advisors, the human resource professionals. These are the folks that are on the ground working with people every day and really supporting them through their own reskilling journey. And so bringing technology to communities is a responsibility of all organizations. SkyHive was formed as a B corporation, so we're a for-profit social impact organization. And so a large part of the work that we do is using our technology and capabilities to support rapid access to employment and opportunity for underrepresented groups. And so we work with, when we say underrepresented groups, we mean groups in the labor market that are have a higher than average unemployment rate. And so we work with refugees, veterans, physically disabled, indigenous communities, low-income communities, et cetera, by harnessing our technology and capabilities to support those unique reskilling journeys. And so I hope that answered your question, Jessica.
It did. Thank you so much. And Ryan, would love for you to jump in here and share as well.
Well, look, I mean, I think when we talk about technology and workforce development, for me, what's top of mind is the fact that technology is really acting as a forcing function for workforce development, because the skills gap that we see is not a result of colleges and universities doing a worse job in terms of preparing individuals with the key cognitive, executive function skills, soft skills they're going to need for problem solving, critical thinking, communication skills, et cetera. That's not the problem. The problem is that digital transformation has completely changed the world of work and jobs and skill requirements, particularly for entry-level jobs, to the point where now entry-level jobs, good entry-level jobs, kind of the first rung on the career ladder for any individual hoping to achieve socioeconomic mobility in this country. Those jobs are almost indistinguishable from the entry-level jobs of a generation ago. A generation ago, you needed a set of sort of well-rounded skills. The fact that you had a degree was probably a good indication that you could learn the job. Today, the vast majority of employers are seeking individuals who have specific platform skills, tech stacks, combined with business knowledge and soft skills so they can be productive in the job on day one. And if they don't find that, they're not hiring for those positions. And so there are millions of entry-level jobs that a generation ago were stepping stones for socioeconomic mobility that today are really oxymorons in a sense. They're you look at entry-level cybersecurity jobs that have skill and experience requirements that basically tell you need 3 years of experience for this job. How do you get that? How do you get that job? And so I think that the technology is causing a huge challenge for workforce development and really highlighting the importance of workforce development. There are lots of conversations in the world I come from, higher education, that a decade ago revolved around degrees and financial aid and Pell Grants that today are around short-term Pell and non-degree certificates and industry recognized certifications and so forth, recognizing that where the puck has gone is around how to connect individuals to good first jobs, and those pathways don't need and shouldn't need in many cases to require a multi-year degree pathway. So it's just highlighted the work that we're all doing and demonstrating that a whole lot of investment and attention is coming into our space.
For sure. Thanks for sharing. And, in today's panel, it's called TECHquity. So I'm wondering if you all can share a little bit about how you've seen technology supporting specific identity groups or sectors. For identity groups, consider race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, learning styles, etc. And I'm wondering if, along with that question, you can speak to any policy advocacy agendas to make technology platforms and data accessible across the workforce development field. And Barani, maybe we can start with you again.
Sure. Well, I think there is reason to be optimistic. I mean, I think a lot of people would agree that at no time preceding the time that we're in has there been so much opportunity. And I'm talking in terms of not just the technology being easily accessible in terms of the fact that you can buy it, but also budgets and money. States have gotten an influx of capital from stimulus and from COVID relief and things like that. And so now is a fantastic time to innovate and to try new ways of reaching underserved populations. So, for example, I know one group that we're focused on working with is the incarcerated and previously incarcerated individuals. And what was kind of stunning to me is to learn that about 2.7 million children have at least one incarcerated parent. And I don't think I need to share on this call, like just the difficulties that folks that come from such a background have in experiencing the American dream. But by working with the nonprofits that are in this call and around the country, it becomes a lot easier. I think that's, Ryan and Sean were also saying, because it's not just about the technology, it's about the people that are interacting directly with these populations. And the technology is kind of like an empowerment tool. It's connected to the internet. It can connect to a lot of different things, but without the program coordinators and the people running the day-to-day operations at nonprofits around the country, it would be impossible to deliver that access, because it's not just about connecting to them to the internet. For example, I was surprised to learn that the average student to counselor ratio is something like 464 to 1, right? So with those kinds of ratios, of course, each individual isn't getting the personalized attention they need to learn about the job opportunities in America. Like Ryan was saying, there are millions of what are called middle skill jobs where people got the right training, they could get those jobs. And so technology can certainly enable getting that training done, and workforce development and nonprofit. There are thousands of locations across the country that can serve as these central points in the community to help accelerate that training and reskilling. And what's the key reason to be optimistic is that the money actually exists to do it today.
For sure. And Sean, can you jump in here as well? Love to hear your perspective.
Sure. So Jessica, in your opening remarks introducing me, you spoke of a methodology that we've invented called quantum labor analysis. And basically what this is it's taking artificial intelligence and analyzing a workforce at its most granular level. So in this context, the workforce could be a person, it could be a team, it could be a company, or it could be a community. And effectively what the methodology is trying to achieve is it's trying to help people understand the first question, which is, what are my skills? So most people don't really know the skills that they actually have. If I were to ask anyone on this call, what are your skills? Maybe 20 or 30%, would resonate in terms of self-identification. What we've seen through a lot of research that we've done is depending on the type of underrepresented group, that self-identification of skills is actually much lower than average. And so women, for example, have a tendency, a propensity to underrepresent their skill set when self-identifying. The next question that quantum labor analysis answers is, what is the collection of the skills that I've acquired through my work experience, life experience, and educational experience? And so each of us on this call, every single person has unique skill DNA, because we've all gone to school in different places. We've all done different jobs. We all have different types of life experience. And so what is the actual skill DNA of a person? And then the third part is about saying, okay, how does that skill DNA relate to every job that's going on within the labor market? And so despite the fact that we would have an overwhelming multitude of socioeconomic barriers to this particular example, having a frontline worker at a Walgreens understand how they can become a brain surgeon was never something that's been democratized. And so, and there's tons of socioeconomic barriers to getting there. But the starting point is information. And so, for example, when you begin to apply this methodology to a workforce and to a set of workers, you begin to see what we call skill proximity. And so we're doing a lot of research right now with Harvard on the notion of skill proximity in relation to economic productivity. In other words, if there's a role that's being automated and there's somebody that's going to be impacted by that role, what are those proximity pathways that that person can take to emerging roles? And so there's a public case study that was done on work we did with the World Economic Forum and Walmart and Unilever, where we looked at a set of frontline customer service workers transitioning into solar installer roles, and what is the actual training path that's required to getting there. Now, doing this at a macro level in real time is very complex. But a pragmatic example of this, as it relates, I'll go back to women. So we, for 3 years, have supported a particular military with increasing the recruitment of women into the organization. And how we did that was we took all of the military roles and applied quantum labor analysis to boil those roles down to their most granular level. We then applied that analysis across the civilian labor market and drew high correlations of matches in the civilian labor market to those military roles. And very pragmatically, a yoga instructor is a high match to 6 roles within the military. They wouldn't have known that, and the military wouldn't have known that. And so what we're seeing is there's this wealth of information that exists when you begin to look at the labor economy through a different lens and a far more granular lens. And there's actually a wealth of opportunity to be explored that is quite untapped. Moving forward, we often see when media are writing about the future of work that they're relating it directly to automation and digitization. And so I'm going to move into your point on the policy question. Now, groups like the OECD and others are beginning to understand that the future of work has far greater consequence. Women in STEM, equity, diversity, and inclusion, reskilling, income gaps, the green economy. All of these issues are going to be impacted as we move through this process that we call Industry 4.0. And so the implications at a policy level start first with understanding, okay, what is the baseline information that we need in order to even have policy considerations in the first place? And so there's a lot of time being spent on catching up to the speed at which this is happening in the world economy. From there, we need to begin to understand what is that cycle of employer to government policy to education to the actual individual that's going to be impacted. And how do we begin to tighten the connections between those 4 areas?
Thanks for sharing. And actually, before we move on to the next question, Sean, I'm curious if you can just share a little bit more on like how we see technology hindering workforce equity, and more specifically, what challenges have you faced with regard to equity and how you've responded to those challenges?
Yeah, and I think, this is a big topic, but one area that I think requires attention of everyone is the whole notion of ethical artificial intelligence or ethical use of data. And this is where we see right now, as the world's in its infancy with respect to understanding this and building this, we have to be extremely concerned about bias. And so, for example, when there's an ATS system, an applicant tracking system, where people are putting resumes into that system in order to apply for a job, they're now starting to use cognification layers that are automating the shortlisting of those candidates without any human paying attention to that. And so if those particular cognification layers are biased, they say, okay, well, if you were a worker at one company versus another, and therefore your reputation score is higher because you worked at a company. This is completely ridiculous from a data perspective. And so it's really good to see that the FTC and others are starting to implement the same rigor in technology evaluation as it pertains to people and workforces as they have previously with fintech and cybersecurity. And so we're going to see that more and more in terms of this focus on the bias on these types of technologies, or the bias that some of these technologies can be creating. And so that's, your question is a very big question, but I'll leave it with that one response.
Sure, thank you. And maybe Ryan, can you share a little bit of how should we be using and promoting technology and career development better or differently, and how do we combat the digital divide?
Yeah, well, I think there are two pieces to this. The first is the importance of technology, education, and training. When we talk about the skills gap, this is what we're talking about. It's these platform skills. It's Epic, it's Salesforce, it's Workday. These are the skills where there are open jobs, where employers can't find talent, where our colleges and universities simply aren't preparing. I was speaking right before COVID to an audience of a couple hundred college and university presidents, and I asked them, I said, please raise your hand if your institution provides any training at all on the Salesforce platform for students, and not one hand went up in the room, which is pretty damning considering the hundreds of thousands of open Salesforce positions, and the fact that we're going to have 3 million new Salesforce jobs created in this country in the next 5 years. So obviously, colleges and universities aren't solving that problem. I think it's the answer is going to have to fall to the workforce development community and new entrants into this space. I do think that the models that are most promising, and I wrote a book, some of you maybe see my last book behind me, that was written a couple of years back, which is sort of a roadmap to the emerging last mile training ecosystem. And I charted out these, boot camps and income share programs and apprenticeship type models. And it's clear to us now that the models that are going to scale furthest and fastest in solving this problem for the country are apprenticeship models. Maybe not formal registered apprenticeship, DOL registered apprenticeship, having jumped through all those regulatory and bureaucratic hoops, but programs that share the key characteristics of apprenticeships, which are on the candidate side, you're hired from day one into a paying job. It's not a training program that you're paying, you're being paid, and there's a clear employer from day one. So there's no friction for the candidate around financial risk or employment risk. And on the end employer side, they have the ability to effectively try the talent before they're being asked to make a hiring decision. So almost all apprenticeships have this model where you have an intermediary standing between the candidate and the end employer, and effectively reducing or eliminating friction for both sides. We're very, our focus as a fund, Achieve Partners, is we are building these apprenticeship programs into scaled business services companies in all of these sectors: healthcare, IT, cybersecurity, Salesforce, data science, and so forth. So that's where we feel we're getting the most bang for our buck, and the benefit, obviously, for the candidate is that it truly levels the playing field, as opposed to a traditional tuition-based program where even with financial aid, there are significant barriers to attainment for underrepresented groups, first-generation groups. Maybe you don't want to sort of take on student loan debt. These programs are jobs, hiring for jobs. And I like to say that if someone is seeking to upskill you in an area where there's ostensibly a skills gap and is seeking you to take on any risk, any financial risk at all for that program, they either have an unimaginative business model or a bad business model, because there's a very willing payor for that upskilling, and that's the end employer who can't find that talent. And you just need a new business model to do that. Having said all that, I think that technology, these conversations can often get conflated with the idea that all we need to do is just put out a bunch of low cost or free training online and the problem is solved. That's absolutely not the case. I wrote a piece a few months back about how Google and Microsoft had made a big deal about putting all this training out there for free and kind of saying, like, our work is done. We know from MOOCs, massive open online courses, that the completion rates on the self-paced asynchronous online courses are south of 5% for an aggregate population. And for the populations that we care about, it's going to be much lower than that. I have not seen an online environment, even one with significant synchronous education or training that is truly immersive or compares with an in-person immersive environment in terms of engaging and retaining, completing students. So I think that the answer here is in-person immersive apprenticeship programs that not only train on the tech stacks and tech skills that are missing, but also on the cognitive skills and soft skills that employers are insisting on for these positions, which just simply can't be done in a purely online environment given the current technology.
For sure. And Barani, you look like you unmuted yourself. You seem like you want to jump in on this question.
No, I just think that Ryan and Sean have dropped some serious knowledge. You know, what I took to 4 years to learn, they just articulated in like 15 minutes. It is absolutely incredible. So what Sean was saying earlier about you know, connecting all the kind of adjacent skills and opportunities, we call that building the classroom to career pathway. So if we identify someone has the ability to become a CNA and then an LPN and then an RN, a registered nurse, right, and get into a career in healthcare, we create the hands-on training simulations to do that. So it can be dropped into a nonprofit or a high school or two-year college, of course, funded by those organizations. And to kind of Ryan's point, what he was saying is like just creating that direct pathway to the employer. Any kind of pre-apprenticeship program that we create in virtual reality is actually created, is created in conjunction with employers. And so that's why we have a lot of success, is because it's actually the employers that are telling us like, hey, if someone can demonstrate these 5 skills, like they're going to get a job offer. You know, man, for anyone listening on this call, like seriously, you just learned about 5 years of information in like 30 minutes.
Well, I'll just emphasize that as we think about apprenticeship, you know, for decades, policymakers have struggled on how to expand apprenticeship from the traditional building and construction trades into the fast-growing new economy areas. And we've always been waiting for sort of large employers to launch apprenticeship programs, and they haven't, and for good reason, because it's complex and it's costly, and they have, you know, more important priorities. And frankly, they'd probably just rather leave these positions unfilled, or, you know, try and recruit experienced talent than invest in new talent. We're convinced the answer is we need to identify new intermediaries to come into these spaces and essentially become talent as a service providers to the ultimate employers, and absorb the frictions. And those intermediaries will take the form of the for-profit business services companies that we're building. They'll take the form of nonprofit organizations. They'll be public entities as well, but they'll all have, again, these same characteristics, which is they eliminate the friction for the candidate by hiring them from day one, providing them with a guaranteed pathway, which means you get better talent, you get more diverse talent in the door. And they reduce or eliminate the friction for the end employer by allowing them to sample or try that talent before they're being asked to make a hiring decision. If you can accomplish that, or your organization's in a position to do that, I think that may be the most important thing you can do. Because if you can envision in America where a decade from now, we have dozens or hundreds of pathways like that across sectors in every MSA in the country, we will have sort of rejuvenated the American dream. Right. I mean, that's really what, you know, the source of the economic, social, and even political challenges we faced as a country over the last decade. I chalk up almost entirely to the sense of frustration around access to good jobs and socioeconomic mobility, and the fact that people are told that you need a 4-year degree and tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt to access those jobs. And that shouldn't need to be the case. We're certainly not advocating for less post-secondary education in aggregate or per capita, but what we are saying is that we need to restack how we consume it, from all you can eat in one sitting to what you need when you need it. And when entry-level jobs are asking for a series of platform skills and business experience that traditional post-secondary education isn't providing and has no interest in providing, then we need a different model.
For sure. And as we move to the next section, I'm going to ask attendees to start dropping in their questions into the Q&A, because we're going to have a Q&A towards the end now that we're nearing it. And so my next question is for Barani. What are your recommendations for the next 4 years for the mayoral administration, for the system, with regard to pursuing your vision for the use of technology and workforce development?
So I think what our panelists are saying here, both Ryan and Sean, are 100% in the right direction. So if you're working at the government level, or even at the for-profit level, this mega trend of focusing on skills and outcomes as opposed to degrees and pedigrees is going to be ultimately the most important thing, especially when we're trying to solve mega challenges such as climate change, right? Like, this is going to require a whole new set of skills that if we were to kind of wait for traditional systems to catch up, it could take a lot longer. But the opportunity to connect people directly, that is, employers with people who are looking for employment, anything we can do to accelerate that, any investments we can make to bring those people together, and not just using traditional systems, but this is where nonprofits, I think, play such a huge role, because there are literally, tens of thousands of locations of nonprofits around the United States that can reach all demographics, whether it's rural areas that have very long distances to drive to get high quality learning experiences, or in urban areas that might be hard to reach, or in less visited kind of areas in the metropolitan area. I think that the trends that were discussed today are 100% spot on. And at this point, it's really all about finding the right people who want to drive that change, because the investment dollars are there, the technology is there. It's just about bringing the people together who want to lead that change.
Yeah, if I control the bucket of funding, I would direct that funding to create incentives for new intermediaries to come into these tech fields and run apprenticeship programs. And, governments invest tens of thousands, or in some cases more, dollars just to, get someone in the door of a college or university and try to get them to complete, with no guarantee of any outcomes. So we should be willing to invest some fraction of that in the event of a successful outcome, if you're placing an underrepresented or first generation individual into a great job, and you've taken the risk on sourcing, hiring, training, and placing them with an end client. So America, unlike almost every other developed country, has no mechanism for doing that on a systematic basis. And if it's going to happen, it's not going to happen at the federal level. Probably will happen at the local and state level first. And so if you have a bucket of money available, think about creating incentives for intermediaries. And if you're in a nonprofit or you run a program, think about how you might become an intermediary and bridge that gap between the education and employment ecosystems.
The only thing I would add to that is, in addition to the incentive to become an intermediary, it's the incentive to get people to work together, because there is, for example, there is a program out there that where the federal government puts out $9 billion a year. And that money does get distributed to the state and then the local levels within the state, like almost at the county level. And by the time all that money gets divided up, they're much smaller investments at the county level. And so that is a fundamental challenge, is some of these investments can cost millions of dollars, but if the pot of money gets divided so small that each individual kind of entity only gets a couple $100,000, then they're kind of hamstrung as to what they can do and how far they can innovate. So to the extent that the money becomes available, I think the other part of it is getting people to kind of pool their resources to work together as opposed to working in silos. I think that's one of the biggest challenges with these big pots of money. Once it gets split up, it kind of incentivizes everyone to work in silos as opposed to working together and using shared services and making their dollar go farther.
And Sean, my next question before we move into the Q&A is, are companies actively working with states and local government to ensure there's a multi-pronged approach to digital equity? And how can the government successfully regulate the fast-moving tech world to ensure equity without hindering the American free market economy?
Small questions, Jessica, small questions. I would say, my perspective would be that private and public companies and governments are not working as efficiently as they could be together. I think to Ryan's point, and I wholeheartedly agree, that it's this notion of the intermediaries that are going to be feeding the workforce of the future. And what's happening right now is a lot of companies in pockets of occupations across the labor economy are in wars for talent. And so they're just creating their own kind of programs. And to Ryan's point, the quality of that in the cross functionality of that in terms of an impact to a community or an impact to a particular industry is going to be limited. And so the answer to the first part of your question is they can, organizations and governments can be doing a lot more in terms of working together. To the second part of your question, the rate and pace at which policy changes are coming is woefully slow compared to the pace of change that's happening with the proliferation of technology, digitization, and globalization. And so, for example, today, 48% of the world's population is connected to the internet. By 2025, 100% of the world's population will be connected to the internet. That means more than half the world's population will be coming online in the next couple of years. In parallel to that, we're seeing the explosion of remote workforces, which means that the competition for jobs is going to extend beyond borders. That's not going to slow down. That was moving very quickly before COVID and is moving even faster after COVID. And it's forecasted that remote work will represent approximately $6 trillion in GDP by 2025. And so a workforce in a small community in the United States will be competing against a workforce overseas. Today, 52% of that world's population that's not connected to the internet is going to require digital literacy training. So you can't just pick up a device and start to operate and understand what this whole world represents. And even to get to that digital literacy training, or to Ryan's point on the intermediary, is taking years to even for people to even understand this. I mean, as it relates to boot camps and other types of definitions for this intermediary, I see very few that have actually generated efficacy with respect to gainful employment and rich employment with rising income levels. And I've seen even less that are being programmatized beyond just pilots around select communities. Now, that's not exclusive. So there are incredible groups that are doing this work, but there needs to be far more focus and attention paid to this. The pace at which decisions are being made with respect to policy need to accelerate, and I would suggest exponentially.
Thank you. So jumping into Q&A, the first question from the audience is, and this is for anyone, how do you determine fit for IT career / readiness for training for a participant coming in without a college degree or prior experience? Do you have an assessment tool or protocol?
Yeah, I mean, we own companies we own about eight companies that do this across different tech stacks, and the answer is different for everyone. There are some off-the-shelf assessments that can be useful, and there are others that we develop internally at each of our companies. Typically, oftentimes, we'll put out there that asynchronous online training that I was mentioning earlier, really as sort of a qualification mechanism. So we'll see, candidates who can complete that coursework on their own. and they can sort of qualify in to the apprenticeship program using that.
Sean or Barani, do you want to jump in there as well?
I think that was similar to what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the only point that I would make is there are technology roles. I mean, for example, we work with a team of women in Ecuador who are doing analog labor market labeling and intelligence for us. There are roles that exist within technology that are spanning, very, very basic skill levels and digital literacy levels. I mean, all the way up to very advanced. The question is, what is going to be gainful and what is going to be automated as more technologies are coming on? So if we take cloud computing, for example, those skills, to the point on Amazon AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, those skills are turning over every 6 months because new capabilities are coming out in the cloud. And so the question is, what is the actual longer term pathway and proximity for individuals that can start off at the ground level and make their way through a rapidly changing occupation?
For sure. And then we have one question specific for Ryan. I'm really excited and motivated by what you said. It really resonates with me because I have long felt that the lack of economic access is at the root of most of our social ills. So thank you. My question, do you know if employers are actively trying to create or seeking programs that provide this type of apprenticeship? And also, can you name some businesses and industries that may have these types of programs?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the answer is that there are certain businesses that are better positioned for this than others. So most of the time when we talk to companies about these models, these apprenticeship pathways, they view it as a cost area, right? Why should we? It's just simply a cost to do this. We focus on businesses where it's not only a cost, but it could be a revenue opportunity for them, where they're positioned as service providers to other, typically larger companies, where these companies can't find access to this trained tech talent, and their clients can't find it either. And so it's an opportunity to invest in talent development and apprenticeship in order to provide purpose-trained entry-level talent to their clients. We call it converting to a talent as a service model. And so there are thousands upon thousands of companies out there that actually, if they turned it on its head and looked at it from a different perspective, would recognize that this is not simply a cost, but potentially a huge revenue opportunity for them and their business. And that's where I think government incentive can play a role in helping to get many of these thousands of potential intermediaries to look at this from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica, can I add one thing to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the Department of Labor did have a program called IRAP, which was meant to, and I know Ryan's probably super familiar with it because he's using the term intermediary, which was used heavily in that policy. But essentially, the whole point of it was to create apprenticeships in a much more streamlined fashion than the traditional work that's required to create a registered apprenticeship. So you could have an industry come together, an industry association, say like a manufacturing association or an IT association, and that group of companies can basically specify the skills that are required for a specific standard. And if someone were to get trained on that standard, they would then receive a credential. And that credential in theory would then, translate to getting this apprenticeship opportunity. So the issue, I think, is that a lot of people don't even know that exists. So that's, issue number one. Secondly, the other part of it is people don't understand that funding actually exists to push those kinds of concepts and implement them. And then the third, and I think the biggest hurdle, is that just requires user behavior to change, which is the hardest thing to do. I mean, the greatest technologies kind of capitalize on existing user behavior patterns. Like this is one where we're talking about like changing the behavior. So it's going to require a Herculean effort. Oh, Ryan, you're on mute.
All right, the best way to do that is to have intermediaries that actually hire. So you can change behavior easily if you're offering them a job, a good job with a pathway to making, call it 6 figures within 5 years with no risk. That's a good way to change behavior.
I think that's easy for the folks who are looking for the employees, future employees. I think the harder thing to change is the behavior of the employers to institute these programs.
Right, which is why I think, again, intermediaries play a role. There are millions upon millions of employers who are just never going to do this, and that's fine. But there are thousands upon thousands who could build scaled apprenticeships serving those employers who are never going to do it, and trying to figure out which you are and whether it's an opportunity for you and your business is something that we're playing a role in.
And moving on to the last question, thinking about the topic of TECHquity, what do you recommend for people with physical disabilities that want to get into the tech industry?
That's a question for Sean.
Sorry, I'm trying to interpret the question. There's a lot of research that is being done, that is also being done, where we've looked at the types of disabilities and the roles that fit those disabilities in terms of a proximity to being able to do those jobs. So, for example, my son is on the autism spectrum, and my son will have an affinity towards data science in terms of roles within data science. And the research has shown that folks on the autistic spectrum have a high propensity to be able to do that work very well. And so this is, again, going back to my point on, as we learn more about roles, we learn more about functioning of workforces, we're now able to establish pathways for anyone within the labor market. And again, there are tons of socioeconomic barriers that prevent us from progressing through that. But I'm very hopeful that with the work like those of us on this panel are doing, that we're moving the discussion forward and bringing awareness to these issues as to how we can prepare anyone in society for success in the future.
For sure. So with that being said, that wraps up the last question for today's panel on TECHquity. Thank you all for joining. Ryan, Sean, Barani, it's been great to be in community with you and in discussion with you. And now I'm going to hand it over to Carrie, who is going to take us to the next section of today's event.